Welcome back. You're still watching the first edition of Business Morning on Channels Television, and we're broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria. We shift our focus away from the fisher business now to something else that also is catching our attention. And we're turning our focus to Africa's private equity, and in particular, Nigeria's private equity sector. And I'm now being joined on the program by Warren Watkins, his partner, head of restructuring and private equity markets, South Africa with KPMG, and Ashil Gill, head of transactions and restructuring East Africa, also with KPMG. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Morning.
Well, in recent years, we've noticed that economic growth rates in Africa have been in excess of those in developing economies and above those in emerging markets. Why is that happening?
I think the mature markets have definitely gone through a difficult time in the last 2 or 3 years, and some of the returns that we've seen there have fallen to 1%, if not less. And the emerging markets are an attractive market now, with their sometimes 4, 6, 7, 8% growth rates, and that's attracted a lot of interest.
Now let's bring it more closer home. You're in South Africa and you're from East Africa. Equity investments in countries, some of the ones we call emerging markets, have actually grown in the last couple of years, like you already mentioned. And is there a particular reason why investments in this region have actually spiked? Could you comment on this, Shia?
Sure. So the first thing is that what we're seeing in East Africa is a rise of the middle class. So you're seeing more spending power from the middle class across all the wider East Africa region that I cover, with GDP growth of hitting about 8% in Tanzania forecast for this year. The reason for the interest is twofold. We have most of our economy is based on SMEs, and they are looking to grow to the next level in order to meet the demand coming from the middle class. And for that reason, they are looking for technical expertise from abroad, and they're looking for financing to help with that growth. So you're seeing that private equity investors are finding it actually it's a bit like you have a push and a pull, and it's a perfect place for them to be.
Yeah, because I was just going to ask you that how much has private equity investments actually contributed to this growth?
So from my estimates, we have about foreign direct investment in East Africa is about $4 billion as of the end of 2013. We estimate about 13% of that is contributed from private equity.
Warren, what about for South Africa? And while you're still commenting on that, could you also chip in about West Africa as well?
Sure. I think I echo what Sheila has mentioned, in that the urbanization that's taking place, population growth, and then the infrastructure development in Africa. You couple those three elements together and the growth rate pops out, definitely on an uprising, and it's an attractive growth rate that's coming to the fore. In terms of South Africa's GDP and the penetration of private equity, it's quite high. And it's growing, if I could put it like that. The other thing is that about 25% of the foreign direct investment is private equity based for the Southern African region. For West Africa, definitely population growth, as we know, is tremendous. Again, infrastructure growth. Again, all of that grows to an increasing GDP and an attraction for private equity.
Let's narrow it down to Nigeria.
Sure.
How much of private equity investment has actually come into Nigeria? Let's say, let's give ourselves a 3 to 4 year period. How much have we seen?
Okay, over that period of time, figures are not commonly known, but as an estimate, I'll give you an idea that it's estimated in South Africa, the total funds under management is 126 billion rand, so it's about $12 billion. That's the total funds under management. It's estimated that there's the same amount of that resident in the rest of Africa. And I would put about 10 to 20% of that in Nigeria.
Okay, so what kind of investors do we have coming into West Africa? What are your typical investors like, either because we're focusing now on West Africa and Nigeria. What are your typical investors like?
Okay, the typical investor is, if we look at the private equity fund itself, private equity fund will invest in the growth sectors that it sees will yield its greatest return. Now, who's investing in private equity? That's a great question. And that primarily comes from pension funds and developmental institutions as well.
To add to that, there is a whole host of investment also coming from what we call strategic players.
Strategic players.
Being corporates.
Okay.
So, for example, just to take an example, would be somebody like Imperial Health Logistics, that's from South Africa, recently made a very big acquisition here in Nigeria of a health logistics business. So you are seeing corporate to corporate transactions as well. So there's a combination of financial investors and corporate investors coming in to help with the growth agenda.
Okay. Now, what particular sectors actually attract such fund managers or private equity investors? What particular sectors? Because I know one of you already mentioned SMEs. Okay, yes, Sheil, you were the one who mentioned SMEs.
Yes.
Apart from SMEs, are there any other sectors? But let's really talk about the SMEs, and then we'll now go on to look at the other sectors that actually attract such private equity investors.
So look, for East Africa and probably applies for the rest of Africa other than South Africa, really the focus when I say SMEs has been more around food, fast-moving consumer goods, personal care, healthcare, all those kind of products where, it's fast-moving and there's an increasing demand. You take chocolates, sweets, all of that. That's where you're seeing a rapid growth, because that's where, if you have any disposable income, that's where you spend it first. Having said that, you do have other sectors that are equally important. Healthcare, for example, there's a lot of investment coming from Asia into the healthcare sector. We've got the infrastructure, as Warren mentioned. Power, especially producing electricity has been the focus really for a lot of East African countries.
Yeah.
And then you've got education. So yes, you've got some longer term and some short term.
Short to medium term.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing that you mentioned that, Sheil, because recently, we undertook a massive reform and a bundling of the power holding company of Nigeria. So power is a very interesting one for us. Education as well. The Nigerian Economic Summit just ended, and that was a focus of that forum. And so it's interesting that we have private equity investors actually wanting to invest in these sectors, but here in Nigeria, do we have any private equity investor who is actually looking to put his or her money in sectors like this, the power sector and the education sector, as well as the small and medium enterprise?
The majority of funds, of private equity funds, are what we call general funds. So they don't always have a specific sector that they will focus on. They're opportunistic and can look at various sectors. And it's the one that yields, it's a yield game. So the one that yields the biggest return and has the best opportunities is the one that will attract that investment. Private equity by its nature is very maneuverable. They can act very quickly, and they're not always geographically constrained either. So they have the ability to be quite flexible across Africa. In fact, they are flexible across the world. So they will look at what yields the greatest return for them. It's very interesting to note, however, that so a lot of people have a negative connotation around that and say, you're in it for the money only as such. But I think an important factor to note for private equity is that they've looked at the developmental issues around private equity, i.e. they've done calculations of what has happened in the private equity portfolio companies versus their listed compatriots on the bourses. And the private equity firms or portfolio companies have come out ahead in the form of increased turnover, greater turnover growth, greater profitability growth, greater employment growth, and also quite interesting, greater R&D investment as well.
Do they face challenges in any form? Because it seems as if it's always, from this conversation we've had in the last couple of minutes, it's like it's always a smooth ride. Are there any form of challenges or issues or hitches along the way?
There definitely are. Like any good business, there are the regulations that one has to follow, the difficulty of taking money into a jurisdiction and out again. It's not plain sailing. You're taking a risk. Make no mistake. It's possibly one of the biggest risks that you can take is buying and selling of businesses. The backing of a specific management team, it's not without its challenges. And in most instances, you want to also take on a lot of debt as well into the business. You've raised the fixed cost basis. Not easy. So you have got a challenge going ahead. It's not an easy game, but they've been able to, over the years, produce some spectacular returns, which have ultimately wound up back with the pension funds and back with the pensioners.
Sheila, you want to add something?
I would like to add, yes, as I say, investing in Africa is not for the faint-hearted, because essentially you are when you invest in Africa, it's a rapidly changing environment, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not for good reasons, and it's the ability to deal with that in the scenario of a skilled, limited resources. Your skilled resources are very limited, and you have this rapidly changing, unpredictable environment to deal with. So, but at the end of the day, no pain, no gain.
No gain. I'm sure most of all of this is going to come up when the annual Africa Venture Capital Association conference begins tomorrow. But what's this conference all about, and what is KPMG's role in it?
KPMG is a part sponsor of the conference, and the main reason for that is that we do provide a lot of services to the private equity industry in assisting them with their transactions, the structuring, and with their acquisitions of the portfolio companies. So it's an important client base for KPMG.
But what is the conference all about? What is this year's conference going to really focus on?
The conferences, or most private equity conferences, revolve around what kind of returns one can expect in the jurisdiction that they are covering. That's important, what the opportunities are. The relationship between the private equity houses and the limited investors, the investor community, that will also be a topic of conversation, and what the investment community is looking for and why. And in some instances, if it's a developmental interest, they would want to see that there is employment that's being created. Indigenization would be an important factor.
Let's just look at this year's theme for the conference. It's the focus is on private capital as being a catalyst for change. And why this focus, and why now?
Well, I think it's, as Warren alluded to it, the returns in the Western or developed countries has been somewhat less. So a lot of funds over the last 2 to 3 years have diverted their interest and the investments into Africa. Typically, a private equity fund in Europe would see a return within 3 years. We're probably at that stage where people are should be seeing returns, and then we're likely to hear success stories of where we have seen returns in a short space of time, versus where the challenges are and where investment periods need to be longer. So the focus is really trying to learn from, if you like, the war stories from around Africa on those investments.
I think I could add to that, the catalyst for change. If you think of a typical private equity deal where you've got the management team is empowered, they've had to invest themselves significantly in the transaction. They then are free to go ahead and move as fast as they want, develop the business that they want, and are often able to do so faster than they've been able to in the past. So the business hopefully will then become more profitable, employ more people, take advantage of opportunities within the jurisdiction, outside, expansion, etc. All of that boils down to additional growth, additional employment, and there's your catalyst for any economy, that this private sector and liquid deployment of capital that can enhance and expand the relevant jurisdiction.
And the World Economic Forum Africa is coming up in a couple of months' time, less than a month actually. It's coming up in May. How much of that is going to encourage more private equity investors to come into the market? Because, we're going to have a lot of key players at this meeting. This is the first time that Nigeria is actually going to be hosting WEFA, and it's a very big opportunity for people to come and see what the market has to offer. But do you think that people will actually come in, investors will actually come in, will be keen to come in and see what the economy has to offer?
Absolutely. If I could give examples around the world, as private equity has become more mature in various markets, it seems to attract even more investment because there's others have gone, they've paved the way, and investment attracts investment often. So if we are putting up Nigeria as a investment destination, it's creating interest in the economy, we should see further enhanced investment. I must add, though, that the governments in the various jurisdictions are very important to that being that catalyst. They must be investor friendly and they must promote infrastructure growth in the economy. All of that adds to the investors' appetite.
Okay, so we're going to see government representatives at this conference, which is supposed to begin from tomorrow. We expect to see government.
We're hoping to see some now.
Okay. Well, as you know, the conference is actually going to start tomorrow, and then we're going to have fund managers, people from the private sector, from the government, and the rest of it. But for how long is the conference going to last? For how many days is it for?
It's for 2 days in total. There are some meetings that have been arranged around the conference as well. When you said how long is it going to last for, I thought you were going to ask how long private equity is going to last for. My answer is indefinite.
Private equity is here to stay.
It is. It's become an asset class of significant power and proportion.
Yes, but then how many people are really aware of this, and how many people actually take this opportunity? Do we have so many of them?
I can give you some examples. In the UK, there was a statistic that was bandied around that up to 20% of private employees, non-government employees, private employees, actually reported to a private equity house. So it's a very big...
me, I'm more concerned about, my own part of town, which is Nigeria.
Yes.
So do we have a number of, individuals who actually, venture into becoming private equity investors?
Yes, okay. So it's a good question as to who's investing. The primary investors are pension funds. Then you get the sovereign wealth funds that are coming in, the DFIs, and then high net worth individuals. Okay. And we're seeing more and more of that. Because the private, if you look at the international or holistic funds under management, private wealth is a massive part of the wealth of the world as such. And as they've become more and more mature, they're putting more and more money into private equity as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the program this morning, Warren and Sheil. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the program. And just so you know, it's the 11th annual AVCA conference starts tomorrow, April 1st, and will end on Wednesday, April the 2nd, just like Warren said, at the Intercontinental Hotel, Lagos. Now, the conference is an opportunity for the most senior African private equity and venture capital industry to meet with fund managers. And the conference will focus on private capital as a catalyst for change. And they'll be sharing ideas with the attending fund managers and advisors on the importance of private capital to growing key sectors. Warren Watkin is the head restructuring and private equity markets at Africa region, and Sheil Gill, head transactions and restructuring East Africa. Well, that's the program for today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm Harriet Agbenyi. I'll see you next month.